My father waited until the champagne was poured, until the cameras were recording, until every investor he'd ever impressed was watching. Then he stood up at my wedding and said, "You are no longer my daughter." He thought he was ending my life. He was actually ending his own leverage. My name is Aria Caldwell. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I was introduced as Victor Caldwell's daughter. My father owns half the luxury developments on the West Coast, high-rise towers, coastal resorts, private aviation terminals with his name etched into the glass. He built an empire, and he built it on control. Control over contracts, control over optics, control over me. I grew up in rooms where love sounded like strategy. At 16, I was told which colleges were appropriate. At 21, which charities I would represent. At 28, which man I was expected to marry. Marriage, according to my father, was not romance. It was alignment. The man he chose for me was Daniel Whitmore, family office heir, perfect handshake, predictable ambition. He shook my father's hand like a junior partner sealing a deal. I felt nothing. Then I met Levi, not at a gala, not at a yacht party, at a fabrication warehouse near the docks. I had secretly funded a small sustainability project, retrofitting outdated waterfront structures with eco-steel frames. It was my quiet rebellion. Levi ran the operations team. He wore boots, his sleeves were rolled, there was metal dust in his hair, and he argued with me. He didn't care whose daughter I was. He cared if my load calculations were correct. He corrected them once. I respected that. We started with coffee between site inspections, then dinners at places without valet parking, then long talks about building things that actually mattered. He never asked about my father. He asked about my work. That was new. When I told my father I was engaged, he didn't yell. He leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands. "What does he own?" he asked. "His company." "How big?" "Growing." "Net worth?" I didn't ask. He stared at me like I'd confessed to fraud. "You're making a sentimental error." "No," I said quietly, "I'm making my own decision." The background check arrived 3 days later. My father placed a file on his desk. Victor Mercer, industrial engineer, owns 38% of a mid-tier fabrication company. No political connections, no board seats, no recognizable surname. "He builds frames," my father said flatly. "He doesn't build empires." "He builds things that stand," I replied. He smiled thinly. "And when they fall?" "They won't." He gave me an ultimatum 2 weeks before the wedding. If you marry him, you do so without the Caldwell name, the trust, or a single share in this company. He expected fear. I felt something else. Relief. The wedding day arrived bright and coastal. 200 guests, media quietly present. My father had insisted. Visibility matters. He placed Levi's parents in the back row, assigned Daniel Whitmore a front table for optics, and waited. We said our vows. Simple, private, real. Then the toast began. My father tapped his glass. "My daughter," he said, smiling for the cameras, "has always been passionate." Laughter. Today, she's chosen passion over prudence. More laughter. He looked directly at Levi. "As of this moment, Aria is no longer connected to Caldwell Holdings. No inheritance, no equity, no protection." Gasps. Camera zoomed. He raised his glass. "To independence." The room watched me, waiting for collapse, waiting for tears. Levi stood slowly, calm. unbothered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He just looked at my father and said, "We don't need it." 4 words. Soft. Certain. My father laughed. "You rent warehouse space." Levi's expression didn't change. For now. And he sat back down. The ceremony ended in fractured applause. Half the guests left. The other half stayed, curious. My father left early, certain he'd won. He didn't know 2 things. He didn't know what I had built quietly, and he didn't know what my husband actually owned. The day after the wedding, my access to Caldwell accounts was terminated. Trust fund frozen. Advisory role removed. My corporate card declined before noon. The message was clear: obey or struggle. We moved into a modest Harbor View townhouse. No gates, no private security, just sunlight and steel beams Levi had installed himself. I started my own consulting firm that week. Sustainable structural retrofits. No Caldwell branding, just my license, my name. Meanwhile, Levi worked long hours, calls on the balcony at night, discussions about acquisitions, board approvals, transition strategy. None of it matched the image my father had painted. One evening, a trade journal arrived at our door. On the cover, Harbor Tech Infrastructure acquires 12 regional fabricators. Founder and majority shareholder, L. Mercer. I looked up slowly. Majority? Levi hesitated, then nodded once. I was waiting until after the wedding. Waiting for what? To know you chose me before you knew this. Harbor Tech wasn't mid-tier. It was aggressively expanding, private equity-backed, poised to dominate sustainable commercial builds across 3 states, and Levi owned 62%. You let my father think that I was small? He shrugged slightly. He never asked. 3 months later, Caldwell Holdings announced its flagship project, the Pacific Crown, a $1 billion coastal smart resort, eco-engineered, sustainable, a project my father bragged would redefine luxury construction. There was one problem. They didn't manufacture sustainable load-bearing frames. They outsourced them. Guess who owned the largest supplier in the region? Harbor Tech. My father's team had submitted partnership requests twice. Both declined. Unsigned, unseen. He never met the owner. Levi kept his name off public filings, used executives as figureheads. Quiet, deliberate. Then came the grand unveiling. 500 investors, press, government officials. A live-streamed event inside a half-completed glass pavilion, and prominently displayed on stage, reserved seating for Harbor Tech's founder. My father believed that night would seal his empire's next chapter. He had no idea who was walking through the door. The announcer stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the majority stakeholder of Harbor Tech Infrastructure." Lights dimmed. Spotlight shifted. Levi stepped forward. No boots. Tailored suit. Calm. Confident. The room erupted. My father's face drained of color. He didn't move. He couldn't. Levi approached the podium. Spoke clearly. Harbor Tech believes in partnerships built on mutual respect. He paused. We declined previous offers from Caldwell Holdings due to strategic misalignment. Reporters leaned forward. However, Levi continued, we are open to future discussions with leadership that values integrity over optics. Then he stepped down. My father approached him immediately. Forced smile. Levi, this is unexpected. Is it? We should talk privately. Levi glanced toward me, then back at him. About what? The Pacific Crown needs Harbor Tech. Levi's tone stayed even. Your proposal was rejected 3 times. You never met me. You never asked. My father's composure cracked. You orchestrated this. Levi didn't flinch. No, you disowned your daughter publicly. I just declined your contracts professionally. Then I stepped forward. You removed my name from your empire. I gestured toward the structure behind us. I signed off on the sustainability compliance report for this pavilion last week. His eyes widened. You? Yes, as an independent engineer. Silence. You needed my certification to open tonight. The realization landed. He hadn't erased me. He had merely removed his own leverage. The press swarmed. Investors whispered. My father stood alone beneath the projection of his own logo. For the first time in his life, he wasn't controlling the narrative. We didn't gloat. We didn't shout. We left quietly. 6 months later, Harbor Tech secured the Pacific Crown contract under new executive terms. My father retained minority control, no longer majority, no longer untouchable. He came to our townhouse one evening. No cameras, no lawyers, just him. I miscalculated, he said. I nodded. Yes. He looked at Levi, then at me. You thought I could scare you into obedience. You can't threaten someone who already built their own foundation, I replied. My father tried to disinherit me, but you can't revoke what someone earned themselves. He removed his name. I kept my worth, and that was the only inheritance that ever mattered.